Jesus was black. Wait, before you disagree, let me prove it to you. After you watch the entire video, you will believe the truth. I know that's a strong way to start. I know some of you just raised an eyebrow. Some of you already want to close this video. But please, stay, because what I'm going to show you today is not my opinion. It is not a theory I made up in my bedroom. It comes straight from the Bible, from the text itself, from history, from geography, and from the simple logic of how the world works. So if you believe in the Bible, then by the end of this video, you have no choice but to accept what it says. Let's go back, way back, before Jesus, before David, before any king sat on a throne in Israel. Let's start at the very beginning of the people Jesus came from. The children of Israel, the people the Bible calls God's chosen people, were not a European people. They were not a light-skinned people. Anyone who has spent a little time reading the Bible honestly, without the filters that centuries of paintings and movies have placed on our eyes, knows this. The original Israelites were a dark-skinned people. They lived in the Middle East and in Africa. They were surrounded by Egyptians, Ethiopians, Canaanites, and Arabs. These were all peoples of color. Dark skin was not the exception in that part of the world. It was simply what people looked like there. Now let's talk about Judah, because the line of Jesus begins with Judah, the fourth son of Jacob. The Bible tells us that Judah himself did something that the religious leaders of his time would have found very uncomfortable. He had children with a Canaanite woman. Her name was Shua, and later there was Tamar, who was also a Canaanite. These relationships are in the Bible, written plainly in Genesis 38. The Canaanites were a dark people. The children that came from Judah's line carried that blood. The tribe of Judah, from which the word Jew actually comes, was born out of mixed African and Middle Eastern ancestry. This is not me reading between lines. This is basic genealogy that the Bible itself records. And here is something that a lot of people skip over. When Moses was living in Midian and married Zipporah, a Cushite woman, that is, a woman from Africa, his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam gave him trouble about it. They were upset that Moses married a black woman. And what did God do? He struck Miriam with a skin disease that turned her skin white as snow. That detail matters. That detail tells you something about what skin looked like in that world. God made her skin white as a punishment. In a world where dark skin was normal and expected, being struck with white skin was the mark of something being wrong. That's the world Jesus was born into. That's the world his ancestors came from. Now let's talk about David, because you cannot talk about Jesus without talking about David. Jesus is called the Son of David all throughout the New Testament. The genealogy in Matthew chapter 1 traces Jesus directly through David's family line. So, what did David look like? The Bible describes David in 1 Samuel 16. When Samuel, the prophet, comes to find the next king of Israel, he goes to the house of Jesse. Jesse has many sons. Samuel is looking for the one God has chosen. And when David comes in, the Bible says he was ruddy. That word, ruddy, is the English translation of the Hebrew word adomoni. Now, ruddy in Old English was used to describe a reddish or dark complexion. But here's the important thing. In Hebrew, adomoni does not mean what white Europeans assumed it meant when they translated it. In the context of dark-skinned peoples, adomoni points to a reddish-brown, deep bronze, or dark-toned complexion. Think of the color of rich, dark soil. Think of burnt copper. Think of the skin tones you still see today across East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. That is the color David's description points to. And it makes complete sense. David was from Bethlehem in the region of Judah. He was a shepherd. He spent his days in the sun, out in the fields with his father's flock. The idea that David was pale, blonde, blue-eyed young man is a European invention. The paintings in the churches, the statues, the illustrations in children's Bibles, those were created by European artists who painted what they knew. They painted their own image onto a story that came from a completely different world. David was a dark-skinned, sun-weathered Middle Eastern shepherd. The Bible tells us exactly that if we are willing to read it honestly. And from David's line came Jesus. That is the line. That is the bloodline. Judah, a man with Canaanite children. David, a man described with dark bronze skin. And then, through centuries, the line moves until we arrive at Mary in Nazareth, a small town in Galilee. And Mary gives birth to Jesus. Now, let me tell you about what the Bible actually says about what Jesus looked like, because here is where it gets very specific. In the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, John has a vision of Jesus. He is describing what he sees. He is not writing poetry. He is not using loose metaphor. He is describing what appeared before him. And here is what he says. He says the head and hair of Jesus were white like wool, not like silk, not like fine European hair, like wool. And the feet and legs of Jesus were like fine brass, as if they had been burned in a furnace. Read that again slowly. Wool hair, brass skin, burned in a furnace. There is only one type of hair that grows like wool. You know it, I know it, everyone watching this knows it. Hair that grows in tight coils, hair that has texture and density, that is the hair that looks like wool. Straight hair does not look like wool. Curly European hair does not look like wool. Wool-like hair is a very specific description that points to a very specific group of peoples, and those peoples are African and African-descended peoples. That is not a stretch. That is the only honest reading of those words. And now let's talk about the flight to Egypt, because here is where logic enters the conversation, and it becomes almost impossible to argue against. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. King Herod, who was a violent and paranoid ruler, had heard from the wise men that a new king had been born. He ordered the killing of all male children in the area who were 2 years old and under. This is what the Bible calls the massacre of the innocents. Joseph, warned in a dream, took Mary and the baby Jesus and fled. They did not flee to Rome. They did not flee to Greece. They did not flee to any European country. They went to Egypt, Africa. They went and lived there among the Egyptians until Herod died. Now think about that. Really think about it. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus had to hide. They were refugees. They were running for their lives, and they hid in Egypt. If Jesus looked like the pale, blonde, blue-eyed figure that Western art has shown us for centuries, do you think he would have been able to hide in Egypt? Egypt at that time was not a white country. The Egyptians were Africans. North African, yes, but they were peoples of color. They can see it in their own art. The ancient Egyptians painted themselves. They painted themselves with reddish-brown and dark skin. That is who was living in Egypt when Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus arrived. If your child looked nothing like the people around him, if his skin was a completely different shade from every person on the street, do you think you could hide? Do you think anyone in that village or town would just forget about the foreign pale-skinned baby? You would stick out immediately. Soldiers looking for a foreign child would find you in hours. But Jesus did not stick out. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus blended in. They lived among the Egyptians, and nobody pointed at them and said, "There is the foreign family." They looked like the people around them. That is the only reason hiding was possible. Jesus had to have looked like an Egyptian, and Egyptians were dark peoples. This is not a complex argument. It is basic, practical, real-world logic. You cannot hide in a crowd if you look nothing like that crowd. Jesus survived by blending in, and you can only blend in when you look like those around you. Now I want to talk about Simon of Cyrene.
This is a detail that a lot of people overlook, but when you understand it, it hits you differently. After Jesus was sentenced and the soldiers were leading him to be crucified, they made him carry his own cross. But at some point, Jesus was too weak. He had been beaten, whipped, and was bleeding. He could not carry the cross anymore. The soldiers needed someone to carry it for him. Out of all the people on that road, out of all the people standing there watching, they chose one man. His name was Simon, and the Bible tells us he was from Cyrene. Cyrene was a city on the northern coast of Africa, present-day Libya. At the time, Cyrene had a large Jewish community, but these were Africans, black Africans. Jewish people had been living in North Africa for generations. Simon of Cyrene was a black man. He was African.
He was in Jerusalem that day, possibly for Passover, as many Jewish people traveled to Jerusalem during that time. Now here is the detail that people rarely talk about. Why did the soldiers pick Simon specifically? There were crowds of people. There were men of all kinds standing along the road. Why him? Some scholars and historians have pointed to one very uncomfortable possibility. Simon may have been chosen because he looked like Jesus, because the Roman soldiers, in their cruelty, may have wanted to mock and humiliate them both, to make a man who resembled the condemned carry the cross. Or perhaps, in the confusion of the crowd, the soldiers grabbed the wrong man first, a man who looked similar enough to Jesus that there was momentary confusion. Either way, the choice of Simon of Cyrene is not random. And if Simon was a black man from North Africa and he was chosen specifically in connection with Jesus, that detail adds to the larger picture the Bible is already painting. The world Jesus lived in was a world of dark-skinned people. His community looked like Simon. His family looked like Simon. He himself looked like Simon. Now let me address something directly. For a long time, the image of a white Jesus was pushed by European colonizers and used as a tool of power. When European missionaries brought Christianity to Africa, to the Americas, to the Caribbean, they brought with them images of a white Jesus. They hung those images in churches. They put them in Bibles. They taught people that God himself, in human form, looked like a European. And those images stuck. They became the standard. They became what people imagined when they closed their eyes and prayed. And over hundreds of years, that false image became more real in people's minds than the actual description written in the Bible. But the Bible never changed. The book of Revelation still says wool hair and skin like burnt brass. Genesis still records the ark ancestry of the tribe of Judah. The history of Egypt and Israel is still geography, still real locations in Africa and the Middle East. The text never changed, only the pictures did. And this matters, not because of pride, not because any one group of people needs Jesus to look like them to feel valid. It matters because of truth. If we say we believe the Bible, then we must believe what the Bible actually says, all of it, including the parts that challenge the images we grew up with. Think about what it means that Jesus was born into a dark-skinned people. Think about what it means that he lived as a refugee in Africa, that the man who carried his cross was a black man from Libya, that the prophets who foretold his coming were African and Middle Eastern men. The entire story of Jesus is a Middle Eastern and African story. It did not happen in Europe. It did not happen to European people. It happened among people who looked like the people of East Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and North Africa today. And that truth has been buried for centuries under layer after layer of artistic reinvention. The paintings, the movies, the stained glass windows, they all told the same lie so many times that the lie started to feel like history. But history is still there. The text is still there, and the text does not lie. I want to be clear about one thing. This is not an attack on any person or any group. People of every background can connect to Jesus in their own way. Faith is personal. Belief is personal. But when an institution over centuries deliberately changes the image of a historical figure from the Middle East and Africa into a European figure, and then uses that image to tell African people that their own history has nothing to do with them, that is not a small thing. That is something that should be corrected. And the correction is already in the Bible. You do not need to go outside the text. You do not need to rely on archaeology, though archaeology also supports this. You do not need to study ancient art, though ancient art also shows this. Just read what Revelation says about his hair and his skin. Just look at where his family hid and who they hid among. Just follow the genealogy back through David and through Judah and the Canaanite women in his line. The Bible itself tells the story, if you are willing to read it with open eyes. There's also something to think about in the name itself. Jesus lived in Nazareth, a small town in Galilee. He was called Jesus of Nazareth. The people of Galilee at the time were Semitic people, descendants of the original Israelites, mixed with the populations that had gone and come through that land over centuries. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, all of whom had ruled over Israel at different times. These were not European people. A man from Nazareth in the 1st century would have had dark skin. This is simply what people from that region looked like, and still look like today in many cases. And Jesus lived and moved and was recognized as one of his people. Nobody looked at him as a foreigner. Nobody questioned whether he belonged among the Israelites. He walked into synagogues and read from the scrolls, and was received as a Jewish man from Galilee. His appearance was consistent with the community he came from. So let's put this all together in one place. Israel was a dark-skinned people. Their very origin is rooted in a land surrounded by and mixed with African and Middle Eastern populations. The tribe of Judah from which Jesus descends traces its line through Canaanite women. David, the ancestor of Jesus that the Bible is most specific about describing, is described with a complexion that, in the context of ancient Hebrew and ancient Middle Eastern people, points to a dark reddish-brown skin tone. Jesus was born to Mary, a Jewish woman from Galilee, in a line that goes directly back through David. When he was a child, he was hidden in Egypt and lived among Egyptians without drawing attention. His appearance allowed him to blend in. And when John saw him in a vision in the book of Revelation, he described wool hair and skin like brass burned in a fire. Every single piece of this, the genealogy, the geography, the description in Revelation, the story of Egypt, the story of Simon of Cyrene, all of it points in one direction. It all points to a man who was dark-skinned, a man who looked like the people of East Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, a man who was not European in appearance, not even close. The painting of Jesus that fills most of the world's churches is a painting of a man invented by European artists during the Renaissance. That man with fair skin and blue or green eyes and long flowing brown or blonde hair did not come from the Bible. He came from an Italian painter's imagination. He came from the faces he saw around him every day. He came from politics and power and the desire of certain empires to make God look like them. But the Bible told a different story. The Bible always told a different story. And now more and more people are reading it with fresh eyes and seeing what was there the whole time. Here is what I want you to take away from this. Whatever your background is, whatever you believe, the truth about who Jesus was and where he came from is a truth that belongs to everyone. It is not a black truth or a white truth. It is just the truth. But the truth has been hidden for a long time, and part of honoring the story is being willing to look at it honestly, without the filters, without the Renaissance paintings, without the Hollywood movies, and without the fear of what an honest answer might mean.
The Bible describes a man with wool for hair and skin like burnt brass. That man was born in the Middle East to parents who were descendants of dark-skinned African and Semitic ancestors. He survived as a child because he could disappear into the crowds of Egypt. He was preceded by a man, Simon from North Africa, who walked the same road he walked and carried the same cross. That is the Jesus the Bible describes, and that Jesus was black. Now I know this video is going to make some people uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort is how we grow. Discomfort is how we question things we accepted without asking why. And I believe that if you are honest, really honest with yourself and with what you just heard, you cannot leave this video with the same image in your head that you came in with. If this video opened your eyes, if it made you think, if it said something you needed to hear, please share it. Share it with someone who needs to see this. Post it, send it to a friend, put it on your story, because the truth spreads the same way a lie does, one person at a time. And if you are new here, please subscribe. Hit that bell so you do not miss the next video. There is so much more to talk about, so much more history that has been buried, so much more truth sitting in the pages of the Bible that nobody taught us in church or in school, and we are going to go through it all together, one video at a time. The truth does not need to be loud to win, it just needs to be told.